the mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank, and like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
The views and opinions expressed by A Little Bit Culty are those of the hosts and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast. Any of the fucking amazeball content provided by our guests, bloggers, sponsors, or authors are of their opinion and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything.
We're not doctors, not psychologists, and we're certainly not the AP. That's Associated Press for those of you listening at home. We're two non-experts who found ourselves making a little podcast that people happen to like. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, everybody. Sarah Edmondson here.
And I'm Anthony Ames, a.k.a. Nippy, Sarah's husband, and you're listening to
A Little Bit Culty,
a.k.a. ALBC, a podcast about what happens when devotion goes to the dark side.
We've been there and back again. A little about us. True story. We met and fell in love in a cult. And then we woke up and got the hell out of Dodge.
And the whole thing was captured in the HBO docuseries The Vow, now in its second season.
I also wrote about our experience in my memoir, Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life.
Look at us, a couple of married podcasters who just happen to have a weekly date night where we interview experts and advocates in things like cult awareness and mind control.
Wait. This does not count toward date night, babe. We got to schedule that. That's separate.
So there's 2 days we got to hang out?
We do this podcast thing because we learned a lot on our exit ramp out of NXIVM, still on that journey, and we want to pay the lessons forward with the help of other cult survivors and whistleblowers.
We know all too well that culty things happen. It happens to people every day across every walk of life. So join us each week to tackle these culty dynamics, everywhere from online dating to mega churches and multi-level marketing.
This stuff really is everywhere. The cultiverse just keeps on expanding, and so are we. Welcome to Season 5 of A Little Bit Culty, serving cult content and word salads weekly on your favorite podcast platforms. Learn more at alittlebitculty.com.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, hanging on to it, my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Welcome back, everybody.
Hey, girl.
Hey, boy. I am really tickled. How's that? Tickled. To share a guest with y'all, somebody who I feel like is going to round out the ex-evangelical Christian trilogy after we had Alice Gretchen and Will Rutherford. Now we have Morgan Hayley, a fitness and yoga instructor who grew up in an evangelical Christian church as the oldest of 6 other siblings.
No longer in that church, Hayley is now out as a proud lesbian woman living in Louisville, Kentucky with her fiance.
And if you know even a little bit about evangelical Christianity, you already know that there's a lot to talk about. Purity rings and righteous gemstones. Anybody?
Morgan joins us to break down her journey coming out of the closet as an adult, leaving the church, and what it means to deconstruct Christianity. We also talked about how this exit process has affected her relationships with her community and what it's like at family dinners nowadays, if at all.
This episode certainly isn't our first rodeo with evangelical Christianity, and of course there are exceptions to the rule. Hashtag not all evangelicals, hashtag live and let live, and if it gets your petticoats in a bunch, well, bless your heart. You're in our prayers. Just kidding.
Thoughts and prayers, sir.
Thoughts and prayers. We hope that you enjoy this very fun and casual conversation with Morgan Taylor. Good morning, Morgan Tyler Hayley.
Good morning.
This is so great. You know why this is great for us?
Why?
I'll tell you, because you didn't have a memoir or a documentary that we needed to watch or read before preparing.
Get to know me as we go.
Yeah, well, that's oftentimes we read the memoir and then we have to pretend that we don't know things so that we can ask questions otherwise.
Oh my gosh.
Right? So this is actually better because we actually don't know your story. Like I know loosely.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, so it's like a really a true discovery of Who is
I love that.
Morgan Hayley Tyler?
Morgan Tyler Haley, MTH.
All the things.
Where to start? Your birth, your parents? I don't know.
Well, I was birthed in 1990. I'm the oldest of 7. So there are 7 kids in our family. First thing people normally ask me is like, oh, from the same parents? I'm like, yes. And then their second question, were you Mormon? No. And it was never boring. And we grew up super duper conservative. We grew up non-denominational, so Christian. And it's interesting because like growing up like that, I never thought of myself in something that I would, use the word cult around. But also, it's so weird growing up in that environment because it is normal. You're in an echo chamber. You don't know anything else. And my parents did a very good job at making sure, well, I'm sure they thought they were like, protecting us from the outer world. But all of our, our music, our media, our friends, everything was very like in a bubble, very sheltered. They kind of controlled all of what we were consuming. So like truly, I didn't know any different. And being the oldest also, that kind of comes with a sense of like responsibility of like, I'm setting the example for 6 of my younger siblings and we were homeschooled. So we were even, in more of a sheltered environment because you're not leaving the house and going to school. Like everything is just very planned out for you by your parents and kind of put into motion by your parents. So it's interesting to look back on as an adult because I have very fond memories of being so close with all of my siblings and getting to take these cool field trips, that like other kids weren't taking. And I think so many truths can exist. Like my childhood was also a place where I was nurtured in one sense, where, I was taken care of. I had food at every meal, clothes on my back, a roof over my head, parents that really drove us in a success-driven, like religion-focused way. And then on the other hand, I also look back and I feel very emotionally stunted, socially stunted. And so it's interesting to look back on the contrast of that and recognize that like so many different truths can exist from like that time in your life.
Well, it's certainly a healthy perspective to have instead of being resentful, angry, and just to kind of take an
Which is okay if
inventory
you
of
are
what
too.
it is. Yeah, well, it totally is. Well, I mean, it totally is. But like to describe it like that, I mean, obviously, I'm sure those emotions exist, but to be at a point where you can go back and kind of take inventory and then separate the two, I think is a healthy approach, at least.
I definitely went through those stages for sure.
I'm sure.
I think like
Yeah.
anyone
Absolutely.
would that comes
Yeah.
out of that. You're just kind of like almost grieving
I had mine.
a loss. Yeah. I mean, yeah. And I think what I try to bring light to on my page, because so many people don't know, like non-denominational Christianity, I personally think is the biggest modern day cult in America right now. Like, but it flies under the radar because it's so socially accepted and like what our nation was founded on, quote unquote. And it's just everywhere. And people don't realize, like there's also so many sects of Christianity. And so one person's story is not going to match another person's story. And I grew up in the Southern Bible Belt, like a very, very conservative, like religious place. And you put on top of that being homeschooled and then also my parents starting their own home church, which this is when it started to feel really culty to me. I was like, okay, we're meeting out in the middle of the woods at a campground with like 8 other families. And the dads decided they were all pastors and the moms brought food every Sunday. And that's when it really started to feel like, okay, we're being isolated even more because my parents at one point got to the point where they were like, even showing up at a church building, they couldn't regulate what was being said there. They weren't in control of what the pastors were talking about, they didn't even want us going to youth group. We had to stay with my parents the whole time we were at church for a period of time. And then they were like, you know what, let's just take them out of church completely and start our own church. And that's when I was like, oh, I look back and I'm like, that's concerning. And at the time, it didn't feel that way. I was so young. I was like, oh, cool. I get to, meet once a week with people that we hang out with all the time anyways. It's like hanging out with my friends. I'm showing up for the food. And yeah, and then you look back and you're like, wow, okay, we met in a really remote spot in the middle of the woods every week. So our fathers could teach us whatever they wanted to.
Where was this?
So I grew up in Kentucky, in Louisville. And I will say Louisville's come a long way. It's definitely a blue bubble and a red state, if you will. But, I've been here since I was 8 years old. I'm 32 now. So it's been, when I was 8, it was much different. And my parents, started homeschooling us. And, when you homeschool, you meet other families that homeschool. And so we start these little co-op groups, where you meet with other families a few times a week, and each of the moms normally teach a different subject, and they kind of delegate out, different subjects. And that's how we grew up. And, it made that bubble of being Christian even smaller, because like I said, you're being taken out of even showing up at like a school. And then at that certain point, even showing up at a church, like anywhere where they couldn't possibly regulate every single thing we were learning or seeing or being taught, kind of slowly, I felt like got stripped away. And it is interesting to reflect on like how I was raised versus how my youngest sibling is now being raised. There's a 19-year age gap. And so my parents are nowhere near as strict and just, really, I don't know what the word is. They're definitely not as strict. I feel like they're still as religious, but I kind of think they're tired. This is their 7th kid. So they're not laying down the law as much as they once were. And so my experience is so radically different than honestly all of my other siblings. I was the first. I was the guinea pig. My parents tested, I say tested, but they did, I went through Passport to Purity, this like workbook for remaining pure until marriage. Like they tried out so many things that half of my siblings don't even know what that is. They're like, wait, what did mom and dad make you do? And it's interesting to navigate that, like they have a totally different perspective of my parents than I do.
What was the homeschool? It's so funny that this has been coming up a lot recently, and almost all of these cults where you're raised in it, there's a homeschooling component. And I just was curious, is that curriculum that you're like still dealing with the sort of US school system and then throwing in some Bible stuff, or is it just religious homeschool?
So you do have to meet a certain criteria, state to state, to get your GED.
GED, yeah.
Right. So my mom did send in paperwork. Like we obviously had to prove that we were learning and completing certain subjects. Now they didn't regulate what the curriculum of that subject was, how it was taught. So like, for example, science to me was taught through completely like a creationist lens.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, I just to put it like simply, I was just taught Darwin was evil. He was evil. God was not, God is a creator. Darwin was evil. Anyone that speaks differently from like what's in the Bible. So that's kind of my whole view of how I grew up to see the world was through a Christian lens, down to what I learned in school. And it's wild to contrast with other people now. And people are blown away to find out, like that's what you're being taught is everything is through this one lens, and you don't grow up knowing any different, and you enter whatever the real world is, when you're not living with your parents anymore and you can talk to whoever you want to. And it's kind of a culture shock.
Was it an abrupt transition?
Actually, I kind of feel like it happened gradually for me because so being homeschooled, right? You can learn at whatever rate really that you accelerate at. And I loved learning. So I actually started college at 16. My parents picked out my degree for me. And, at this point, you're just a kid, like you're 16. I'm not going to be like, if my parents pick something out for me, I'm assuming at this point, they know what's best for me. This has just been normal my whole life. So like, I really didn't think anything of it at that time. I was like, oh, great. You picked out vascular sonography, which is, ultrasounds of like the veins and arteries. Like, that's cool. I love the body. I love taking pictures. Like, sounds like y'all picked out something, great for me. But like at 16, you don't know what you want. So I went to school for that. And I went to a local community college where I would go there during the day. And obviously I was still living with my parents at that time because I was young. And I think that was when that was really my first time I was like going into the world, if you will, like showing up at a classroom that they weren't at, interacting with, people that were single moms and adults, like, getting their college degree. People in my classes were anywhere from, 18 to in their 50s. And I think that was very eye-opening for me, just being around people of different walks of life that didn't grow up like I did, that weren't religious. And so that was kind of a slow like step in that direction. And then I ended up getting married super young at like 20 years old. And I think that was another kind of starting to like get out of my parents' world and into just like my world, but still very religious. I married someone that was also a Christian, whose parents were very prominent in the church that we grew up going to. And I wouldn't say, honestly, it wasn't until my divorce where I just felt like I ripped the rug out from under myself and was like, whoa, for the first time ever, I am doing something simply for me, and not because anyone told me to, not because anyone, navigated me in this direction, but like literally doing it for me and simultaneously going against every person in my life right now. Because still at that point, when I got a divorce, most of my friends, like you just keep the same friends. You're in that community, you grow up with those people, like you all get married young and follow the little life plan that everyone does when you're living that lifestyle. And so, yeah, when I got a divorce, it was a huge eye opener for me, just how people in that community that say they'll support you no matter what and love you unconditionally, how they actually show up in their actions when you do something that they don't agree with. And I think that's very enlightening for a lot of people coming out of any kind of culty situation like that. They're just like, whoa, I thought you were like my family.
How long did you stay married for? Like, how old were you when you got divorced?
So I was married for almost 5 years, and we'd been together, I think, for almost 8 at that point. So it was a big chunk of my life. When I got divorced, it was probably like we'd been together for like a third of my life. And I'm honestly so glad. There's one person I told when I was married how unhappy I was. And you know how sometimes you like look back and you're just like, did I make that more dramatic than it was, or was it actually that bad? And I am so thankful I told this one friend how I was feeling during my marriage, because she remembers all of it. And I just like, she was the only person I opened up to. And I'm so glad I did that, because I think when you come out of situations like this, a lot of people like to make you feel like you're crazy or, you're making that too much of a big deal. It wasn't like that. No, it was like this. And I've done that at times where I've gone back and doubted my own experience because, people make you feel crazy about it. And so coming out of that was just so eye-opening to see the few people that really did stand by me and I'm still friends with to this day, versus the people that were like, oh my gosh, like growing up, you couldn't even say the word divorce. We called it the D word. Like it, like you don't say the word divorce. It's like an unspoken,
Wow.
like that doesn't exist in the world that I grew up in. It's not an option. And for so long, I think I stayed in the marriage for as long as I did because I was taught that, your life is not for you. It's about sacrifice. It's hard. It's not for your happiness. And to enter the kingdom of heaven one day, like you have to, sacrifice lots of your happiness in this earthly life to be a good Christian. And so I was convinced for most of my marriage that I was actually doing the right thing because I was miserable.
That's such a crazy part of that doctrine. I didn't
Yes.
realize it was so like suffering is key.
Yes.
Suffering
is key.
Why do you think that? Who benefits from keeping people miserable? Why? Wouldn't you want your congregants to be happy?
Yes, ideally, but I also think happy people have more self-confidence. I feel like when you keep people miserable and you keep people scared, they're much more susceptible, to what you're teaching them.
If you start to spread your wings and want to be happy, I imagine there's a contingency of people who are like, who do you think you are? You get to be happy. So they reinforce it. I mean, Sarah, we saw it on a micro level with the people that were in the inner circle. Like, why do you get to be different from us and go do that? So they probably feel
Right.
a little bit resentful that
Yes.
you want to go do what they're afraid to do.
Yes, it's such a good point. I was
Yeah.
just talking about that the other day. Like, people project that onto you. They see you doing something that deep down they're like, man, like, I wish I could have that. Or like, they see someone else doing that and they immediately shut it down because they can't have that. They can't have that in their own life. That's not right. Like, if that person can have it and I can't, I mean, we see that all the time. People just projecting their own stuff onto someone else that's actually out there trying to change their life.
And I meant to ask this from the beginning. Were your parents also born into Christianity, or did they choose it?
So it's interesting. They're so quiet about how they grew up, which is one thing I think they probably did on purpose. Like, I had this image of my parents as very like perfect couple, perfect, like they didn't talk about their mistakes or their flaws often. So I really don't know that much about their childhoods other than, I mean, I know basics. My dad grew up in a very like standard Catholic family, just kind of Sunday morning Catholics. You show up, you go to mass. He was raised by a single mom. And my mom was raised very religious. Her parents actually immigrated over from England. So they were super Christian. She grew up in a very Christian home. And when her and my dad met, her parents didn't want her marrying someone like out of the Christian faith. So my dad actually converted to Christianity in order to marry my mom. And I think he actually feels like Christianity in a lot of ways saved him. He had like a rougher childhood, single mom, poverty, and, Christianity for a lot of people, like this is where it's like the hook, line, and sinker. They look for people that are vulnerable, that are struggling, and that's their lifeline. They sell it to them as a lifeline. And I think that's what Christianity ended up being for my dad. And so I almost think the people that choose Christianity as an adult on their own become more ingrained in it than the people that were indoctrinated into it because they've actually chosen it. They have made a choice that like, this is the truth. This is what they believe. They like chose it for themselves as an adult. And I've watched him over and over again defend his faith. Like, there is no budging him because he is so rock solid. And on some level, I respect that. I'm like, you know what? Like, you chose this for yourself and you actually like live it in and out. Like, you're so solid in the fact that this is your belief versus the people that are just like, like me, I was indoctrinated into it. And I'm like, well, I believe this because my parents do. Like, it's whatever. So yeah, I feel like my dad on some level is like very, very, very religious because that was his choice and he chose it. And in a way, like, we're afraid to say we made the wrong choice. Like, it's scary to make that choice and then later in life be like, you know what, I messed up. And I think that's really, really hard for a lot of people. And I know my dad, and I know that would be a massive hit to him to ever be like, I actually don't agree with this anymore.
I'm dying to know about your departure out of it all. But before we get to that, when you look back at this time before your divorce, what were the other things that you see as being culty other than what you've said already, like isolating you from the rest of the world and a very specific doctrine? I
mean, the isolation was huge. Like, looking back at that, and I think just like the repetition of things. We woke up every day and I can recite so many chapters of the Bible to you all. It's not even funny. Like, it's just like ingrained in my brain. And we would wake up and the first hour of every day would be scripture memory. And I look back at stuff like that and I'm like, why? Like, that's just so weird. And also we grew up where we were not allowed to really ask questions. Like, and again, my other siblings probably have way different experience. But for me, growing up, if my parents said something that we didn't agree with, we had to be like, if we wanted to say something back, we'd have to ask, may I appeal? Like you're in front of a judge or something. And they could either say yes or no. And so that felt very culty to me looking back, where you're just like, you don't even get free say with your thoughts or opinions.
Is it still like that?
No, it's not. And my younger siblings, like being raised totally different, but also the control over who I dated. Well, we weren't even allowed to date. It was called courtship. You know, you don't date, you court, which is basically dating with the intent to marry someone. There's no messing around, you know, like if you court someone, you are marrying them. So my parents picked out my first boyfriend for me at 16 and we were courting, and I had to write down a list of 10 boundaries surrounding this relationship with this person they picked out for me. And some of them, you know, were like, no being in the car after dark. No, this is so silly, but like, no interlacing handholds, like open palm handholds. Cause like, you know, God forbid interlacing hands was very like sexually tempting. You know, if you're in your bedroom, leave the door open, whatever. It was a list of like 10 boundaries that I was supposed to uphold in this relationship. And I had to give it to my dad, and he printed off 10 copies and gave them to every other dad in our home church group. They were to hold me accountable. And, you know, as a 16-year-old, just having strange men like have this inside intimate knowledge to a relationship you didn't even choose for yourself. Some of it having to do with physical boundaries surrounding your body, and them having this list and them having the freedom to approach you at any time and be like, oh, hey, like, how you doing on this boundary? Like, that is messed up.
That's messed
I look
up.
back at that. It's messed up. And, you know, I went through this program called Passport to Purity, where I basically had to sign a contract with my parents at the end between me, them, and God, saying, you know, I, you know, stay sexually pure until marriage. But it was this whole weekend away with my mom where I had to listen to cassette tapes and do experiments. Like one of them was, you know how you fold up a paper and you can cut out and make a paper snowflake when you open it up? So one of them was this paper heart, a cutout of a paper heart. My mom told me to fold it up, and she's like, start making little cuts into it with some scissors she gave me. And then she's like, okay, stop, like open the heart back up. There's obviously a bunch of holes in it. And she's like, this is every time you give yourself away intimately to someone before marriage. And that could be a kiss. Like, I'm not even talking, you know, sexual intercourse. Like, it could literally be just giving away any part of your body to someone before marriage. And she's like, these holes represent a piece of you that you will never, ever be able to give your husband one day, because you've given yourself, that sits with you, you know, like I will literally never forget that. And so all of these things looking back on, I was in a low key cult. Like my whole life was chosen for me, was picked out for me, was controlled, regulated. And yeah.
This is the golden age of cult recovery. The more we speak up and share our stories, the more we realize we are not alone. Your voice and your story can empower others. This is Sarah, and I'm proud to be a founding collaborator of the #IGotOut movement. Learn more at igotout.org.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
The Frankies were a picture-perfect influencer family, but everything wasn't as it seemed.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here asking for help. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. Ruby Frankie is his mom's name.
Infamous is covering Ruby Frankie, the world of Mormonism, and a secret therapy group that ruined lives. Listen to Infamous wherever you get your podcasts.
I know you haven't listened to any other podcast, but specifically ours. So I'm going to tell you about a segment that we have in our podcast. It's called That Chaps My Ass. And it's things that that you really just chap your ass. And for me, when I hear that about like these men in your community, like knowing about your dating at 16, it just feels really, it chaps my ass in a very big way, but also just it feels really icky. Like it's just
so icky.
So icky.
It's such a violation.
Such a violation.
Of like self.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a question. Are you alone in this? Are your siblings with you? Are you talking to them? Like, what's the...
So that is a hard question to answer. I'm estranged from some of my siblings, and not in the sense like, we don't talk, but we talk on a very limited basis. Very few of my siblings, I don't even know if they've deconstructed themselves. Lots of my siblings are very defensive of my parents. And, it's hard. Like when you're the first one in a group or a family to kind of start to break that generational trauma up, you're kind of like an outcast. And I know my siblings love me, but I am not close to most of them on a level to where I have any idea how they view their childhood or what they think of these things now. And I think also me, I came out much later in life. And I think that also threw my whole family for a loop. I went through a divorce. I came out at I don't even know how old I was, 27, 26, 27. And half of my family, even my siblings included, think that if you're in the LGBTQ community, you are majorly sinning and, that's against their beliefs. So that's been another, separate road to navigate. And I also currently don't talk to my parents. So I cut them off, what is the date? 3 months ago. Haven't talked to them in 90 days.
What happened there?
So my youngest sister, like I said, there's a 19-year age gap, but we're bookends. She literally was born the day before me, almost exactly 19 years apart.
Wild.
And we're the oldest and the youngest. So we call each other, we're bookends of the family. And I wanted to fly her out to visit because my parents moved out west. We grew up in Louisville, but they moved out west, I think 8, 9 years ago. And I was married at the time. So I stayed and my whole family left. And I had, once COVID hit and everything, I hadn't seen some of my younger siblings in years. And, when they're that young, they grow up so fast. I'm like, man, I haven't seen my sister since she was 10 and she's 13 now and almost 14. I asked my parents, I was like, hey, can I, fly my youngest sister out here? She's never seen our home that we live in, that we've been in for almost 5 years. And, she goes everywhere all the time. She's flying to Mexico with best friends and their family and flying across the country to stay with my other sibling and his wife. And I was like, I have Southwest points saved up. Let me, fly her out just for a long weekend, spring break, whatever. And they were like, okay, well, we need to talk about it. I need to talk with your dad. I need to talk with your mom. And I was immediately like, okay, that's not good. Long story short, they ended up saying they wanted to come with her, or one of them would be accompanying her on this trip. She wouldn't be allowed to spend the night. She'd have to stay at an Airbnb with one of my parents. And they didn't want her, quote unquote, digesting 4 to 5 days of my relationship without them being around to answer questions. And that right there was just blatant evidence of their homophobia to me. And I have never in my life felt like, I was treated like a predator by my own parents. And that was a moment that will be seared into my mind forever. Ugh. I just was like, I was like, you do realize you're also speaking to your child about your other child.
That's so hard.
Yeah. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. I have been through so much with them in the last 5 years since coming out. And I have tried so hard. And at some point, I was just like, you know what? I need to choose myself and my family that I have now. I cannot keep trying and putting us through this harm over and over again. And for what? I really hope that one day, things change. There's always that little bit of hope in me because I'm their kid. I feel like any kid at some level wants that love and validation from their own parents. And, it's been 90 days and I blocked their numbers, just their cell phone numbers, so they couldn't send me anything that I didn't want to see. But they have my email. They have 6 other kids that if they really needed to reach me, they could. And this is the crazy part about religion to me and how it feels so culty that parents could choose a belief system over their own kids. I'm telling you, if this was my kid that did this to me, I would have emailed them the second I found out they blocked me and been like, I am so like, what can I do?
Right.
I will give you space, but I want you to know that I'm here and I love you. And I'm so sorry for whatever I did to cause this between us. And like, I am here and ready to listen. And it bewilders me every day that I have not heard from them. I'm like, it's so sad every day. It's terribly sad, but also the most peace I've ever been at, which is such a bittersweet feeling for me as a human,
Have they ever been that way with you?
Ever been
Like,
oh, you mean like
I'm here for
open
you
to
under other circumstances, and like, is it a realistic expectation or?
So I was just talking about this with my fiance. They have never been there in the way of just being there. It's always, we're here, but this is what you need to do about this. We're here and under these stipulations. With my divorce, like, they're like, we're here for you, but here's a counselor you need to go see to fix your marriage. Here's a book about how the grass isn't greener on the other side. Here's a whole bunch of people you need to talk to convince you that this is the worst mistake of your life. So like, it's the conditional, unconditional love.
Well, yeah, you're a problem to solve and not someone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. But I'm like, I have never had my parents just comfort me on just a basic, like, nervous system to nervous system level.
Right.
Just like comfort me as a human.
I like that.
And just hold me when I'm crying and just say, it's okay. Like everything's okay. And that's never happened. And I think now as an adult, I kind of feel hardened in a sense, like, having that your whole life, I see that show up in my relationships and how I react to other people that are so open and emotional and vulnerable. I feel that I'm like, I have to take a step back for a second and be like, it's okay to let them just be. And, I sit in my own uncomfortability and, try not to project any of my stuff onto them because like, I'm still learning how to like be open and emotional and like be okay with being uncomfortable.
Do you feel like when in those moments you have like old programming that pops up, or like what stops you from being there?
Absolutely. I think that, having any emotions growing up was viewed as something that needed to be fixed. If I was having mental health isn't really a thing in a lot of religious communities. You're like, for me, it was, oh, you're having a bad attitude day. Like you need to ask Jesus to give you a good attitude. So
thanks,
anxiety
Jesus.
and depression don't exist.
Didn't Jesus give me the bad attitude?
Jesus can fix my attitude?
No, only Satan gives you bad attitude.
Oh,
jeez.
I'm glad. Nippy.
Yeah, that's from the devil.
Now I can blame my grumpiness on Satan. I'm so happy.
Yeah, Satan's a scapegoat for everything bad in life.
I'm curious. I would imagine being gay was a catalyst for you to wake up, because I imagine at every corner when you had those impulses, you just felt squashed and probably not a whole lot of outlets to discuss it. So,
no.
I imagine that felt like a cage in that community.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's this term called compet or compulsive, like being compulsively heteronormative, meaning when you grow up in an echo chamber and you're being told what is correct, and that's all you see examples of, you instinctively just naturally go in that direction, because anything outside of that norm is just, you're treated as an outcast. Like it's not good. You lose everything if you choose anything outside of that box you've been raised in. And so I really think I struggled with compulsive like heterosexuality growing up, because that's what I was raised around. That's all I knew. And it wasn't until I was out on my own and really like, what does Morgan believe? What does Morgan want? I've never asked myself that. It's always been, oh, what are my parents like? What do they think is best for me? What are they saying is next in my life? And so I say being out in the world, but like truly being out in the world. And I think honestly, becoming a yoga teacher almost saved me in a way, because I was opened up to so many other belief systems. I mean, like yoga is rooted in a completely different belief system. And so going through my teacher training, even, I felt very defensive of my Christian faith at that time. I was still a Christian, and this was the first time I was hearing teachings of really like other religions and belief systems. And I remember walking out of my yoga class. I was so offended and like, self-righteous with my nose up in the air, like, oh, this is not the truth. This is not the way. They're just like spreading lies in my yoga teacher training. Like I couldn't even listen to another viewpoint or belief system because it's been so ingrained in me that like, this was the truth. This is the ultimate truth, the only right way. Anyone else is lost. You should, be like, oh, bless your heart. Like you have no idea that, what you're believing is wrong. Just type of attitude. So yeah, just being like, I look back now and I'm like, oh my gosh, my first yoga teacher training was really that true window of being taught for the first time how other people live and their culture and what they believe. And that just opened up a whole door of kind of curiosity and being like, if I'm going to be a yoga teacher, I better get off my high horse real quick and get on a level of being open to hearing other people's beliefs. Cause like, I'm not going to be teaching people that are all the same as me. And up to that point, I'd really only ever been around people that were the same as me.
Good for you. That's amazing.
Thank you.
What kind of yoga were you practicing at this time? I'm just curious. Tangent.
I did a 200-hour and just like vinyasa. And since then, I've taken so many other trainings. I have like 800 hours and different styles of yoga. And I think I've just kind of ultimately figured out my own weird style. I don't even think it has a name.
Sarah, you like Habadabanamanasana? That's the one you like?
Utthita Hasta Padagustasana?
Yeah.
I said that the other day.
I butcher all these things. When I go to class with her, I was like, Sarah, are we gonna do the yoga malaga? And she's like, yeah.
All the Sanskrit. I know.
I'm just doing all of it.
I dragged Nippy to yoga. I love it. I mean, our listeners know that
I like
yoga,
it too.
But I have to do very non-culty yoga. Like I can't do Kundalini or Bikram.
Yes.
Or
Okay.
Want to do your Kula?
Yeah. So
you do your Kula?
that's a whole other crossover, y'all.
Yeah,
like I discovered later. Okay, so I think it's so fascinating. When you get out of one belief system, it's so easy to jump right into another because it's your comfort zone.
We see
but
it all
you
the
think
time.
since it's different, right? You think since it's different, it's like, it's different. It's not what I came from. But like, as I've actually gotten further out of the yoga community, I've honestly like how people don't like calling themselves Christians anymore if they're a decent human. I, in the same way at this point, kind of hate calling myself a yoga teacher because the woke spiritual community has also really brought itself a bad name. And there's so many crossovers between fundamentalist type religions and this woke spirituality culture that we have now, where we have just a bunch of, very big egos telling people that this is the right way to live. And they're not going to find that in themselves. They have to find it in someone else or outwardly. And it's been really interesting to deconstruct from Christianity and then years later also start deconstructing from that ultra spiritual community that I was really ingrained in for a few years. I'm like, whoa, like hindsight is so weird because I totally thought I was, just like coming out of Christianity and learning all these like worldly, like actual truths and beliefs. And then, fast forward even years down the road and I'm like, oh my gosh, I jumped from one belief system to another.
That is such a key, great awareness. And we see it all the time. We call it cult hopping.
That's so legit. I mean, it's a thing.
It's a thing.
It is a thing.
The doctrine might not be as, historical, say like Christianity, but it's equally as us versus them-ish.
Well, it's
and
dogmatic.
righteous. Dogmatic.
Yeah,
and
it is.
It's dogmatic. It usurps the very principles that they're pretending to champion. And it demands obedience at its worst.
Yes.
So yeah, we really don't like to be told what to think.
No.
Even if that way is a great way. It's just stop telling me to let me figure it out on my own.
Well,
yes.
the problem, here's the problem is when people get their, belief heroin from one side, they tend to give a hall pass to the person that shares their belief and don't necessarily hold them accountable for the process of how they're enforcing their belief. And the force behind those beliefs is the problem. It's not the belief itself. right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So
it's very true.
I'm super sensitive to, like, even if someone is saying something I agree with, it's how they're saying it and how they're going about it that I just have, like, my flags go up. I just go, I'm not sure yet.
Yeah.
You know, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because it's one thing to just like share what you believe from like a genuine place, but I feel like most people are sharing it because they feel they have to tell you about it or convert you, or their way is the way. I very rarely meet people that are a part of a belief system of any kind that don't think theirs is like literally the way.
Well, they chose it, so why wouldn't they?
Right.
That's the
right,
whole
exactly.
thing.
It comes back to that choice, that freedom of choice.
Yeah.
Like you can't admit, like, and if they do think it's wrong, they're definitely not admitting it to you.
Right. Yeah. Unless it happens on an international stage and you're forced to.
Exactly. Yes.
Which is another lesson.
Hey there, listener. Hope you're enjoying this episode and that you're remembering to hydrate, stretch, and unclench your jaws. Sometimes listening to conversations about heavy topics can really make you tighten up, you know? And remember, a little bit culty loves you. Also, come hang out with us on Patreon after you finish this episode. It's fun over there. Fun is good. And now, here's a brief message from our sponsors.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
So you've deconstructed from two culty things.
Yes. Two culty things. I honestly, like, yeah, it's so weird. It's like, I thought for sure Christianity was going to be the only one. And yeah, then here we are. And, you know, you hear about all the abuse from people placed in positions of power in these institutions and stuff. And that is rampant in the yoga community. You know, these gurus, these teachers, again, that think they know what is best and have had all of this, you know, they're put up on a pedestal, and it's devastating to see how many people have been hurt.
A lot of them are like 23, 24.
Yes.
Reciting this. Sarah knows my whole shtick around this. Like, I've done it before. When we would go to yoga class, I had a web series where I did an episode, and it was basically kind of having fun with that.
Like nippy sort of jock meathead guy going to a yoga class, and the teacher's
easy.
Oh, I mean, no, not you, but like playing that character.
I was playing.
It's a character. And the teacher being like, we were talking about the Kula. Was it Kula you were talking?
It was all of them. It was like, you know.
She was like, let's rub our hands together, and then we're going to touch each other, and like we're going to create Kula, which is Sanskrit for community. And it was just really forced, you know. The
one was like that thought you have in your head about I'm not good enough. I'm like, wait a minute. Whoa. I wasn't thinking that. Like, and it's just like this whole like,
wait, don't put that on me.
Don't project
now I am. Jesus,
I'm great.
Yeah, Lippy's like, what if you think you're too good?
I was like, hold on a second. I'm having the exact opposite problem right now. I think I'm awesome.
Either way, it's just the ego rearing its ugly head.
I was like,
yes. Yep. And it's interesting because there's this whole concept of emptying yourself, like the emptying of yourself. And I'm like, you know, the having the feeling of you're outputting so much, like be empty of self. And I'm like, you have to have some self. I was like, people are emptying themselves so much that they're actually not aware to others at all. They're so involved with self, thinking that they're emptying themselves, that they've completely lacked awareness to look outwards at how they are affecting others by tapping into like this wokeness. And it's so interesting because I've watched it happen to people like, you know, that we're close to, and there's nothing that you can say, you know, there's nothing probably people could have said to you. And I don't want to speak for you, but for me anyways, like when I was enveloped in Christianity and in the thick of it, there was nothing anyone could have said to me to talk me out of it. And it's not until you come to like that own realization or something happens where it's just like, that was a straw that broke the camel's back. Like that was the moment it happened. And I've had to kind of relinquish that wanting to, when you're out of it, when the veil has lifted, you just want to drag everyone else with you. And, I've kind of had to like, come to peace with that those people, may never. And if they do, it's certainly not going to be because I told them to.
Yeah. Any amount of force is kind of like, I always watch my impulses to use force.
Yeah.
Because I think that's exactly what you get back.
It's surprising to me that you haven't heard our podcast, because what you just said is what Nippy's always telling me, because I'm still trying to drag people out of the wreckage, and he's like, it's not going to be you, Sarah. Not going to be you.
I know.
and well, it's not going to be you in the sense of like, remember what it was like when you were in, like you just said, like the best thing you can do is just plant a little seed and be a different example and a different path.
Exactly.
And that requires,
I call them little thought nuggets.
Yeah,
thought nuggets. What kind of
so
thought
much
nuggets?
patience and so much discipline to do that, because you want to scratch that itch.
Oof.
And scratching that itch solves your problem, not theirs.
It does. I know. Well, and honestly, I think that's why my Instagram has become such an open journal for me to share my thoughts, because like it does scratch that itch. Like I'm getting all these words out and things I want to say. And you know what? If someone happens to read it that is in that, and if all it does is plant that seed, plant that thought nugget, then I have hope one day that maybe they'll loop back to that and be like, because that's what did it for me.
Well, that's your power. That's your superpower. No, think about it.
I hope so. I really like to think that my writing is my superpower.
Yes.
Oh, I just remember being super Christian, but also being an influencer on Instagram and having people approach me about very problematic things, like me traveling over to Kenya and Uganda on these short-term, ineffective, mission trips full of white saviorism and thinking you're going over there again, forcing your beliefs on a community that didn't ask for it. And I was 27 when I went on my last one. Not that was only 5 years ago. And I had so many people start to approach me about how problematic it was. And I'm over here feeling like, how dare you? Like I am helping people. this is what I've been taught as good, as what is good. But the more people reached out to me, I was very, very defensive. But I sat on it. You can't not sit on it. You can't have so many people approach you about the same thing and not reflect back on it and be like, I wonder why so many people have all the similar like issues and problems with like what I'm doing as a person. And I think that was the first time I actually really, really reflected on why I believed what I believed and started critically thinking about it. Because, you're not taught to critically think. That's another huge issue growing up in cults or super fundamentalist families is you are not taught critical thinking. You're taught this is what you believe. This is how it is. This is how the world is. And you're not to ask questions. And so learning critical, like free thinking as an adult has been hard and also very like, incredibly powerful for me. And I think that last missions trip I went on 5 years ago was the first time I really, truly asked myself, like, why am I upholding these beliefs and who are they helping?
Mm-hmm. So you became an influencer through yoga, but you were still Christian at this time? Or where is your...
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I was still calling myself a Christian because like at that point I wasn't going to church or super like, as dedicated as my parents were. And, once I moved out, I kind of found my own vibe with it, like my own way. But I definitely still called myself a Christian because I didn't know anything else. And at that point, I wasn't comfortable saying, no, I don't believe in God. Like that felt, I honestly thought at that point I was going to get like struck down still. There's like that fear in you, like you cannot say that out loud.
Circling back to, I just was curious about how, like with your following on Insta, on social media, that came from your yoga, but you were still Christian at the time. And then you deconstructed and you did that publicly on Instagram.
Yes.
Okay.
So they've been through a wild ride with me. Yeah. I've been, I guess you could call it influencing or whatever, but basically my full-time job has been Instagram for a decade now.
Wow.
And that started with yoga and just sharing my progress. And my account grew in a year from like 200 followers to 100K. And then it just kind of snowballed. I, made my way up to almost 600,000 followers over the course of these few years and just sharing my yoga practice. And at that time, I was still very much a Christian. I was very typical kind of, sheltered white girl yoga teacher who was a Christian and just sharing, all my Bible verses and probably like toxic positivity on the internet and going on missions trips. But the following that I originally cultivated was a lot of those similar people, Christians, people that looked like me, young women. And so I've lost 300,000 followers since deconstructing and coming out. And I get it,
So you lost half your following.
I did.
Wow.
I did.
That's
yes.
wild.
And I'm grateful for it because numbers are just numbers and they're not going to support you anyways, whether they're showing up as a number or not. But it is, it still affects you on some level, just like, wow, like, especially coming out, I'm already getting so much hate from my family at that point, from friends that thought they knew me. And like, just to see, your online community kind of get cut in half, it's definitely a blow. And it's like, wow, like just because of who I fell in love with, it's hard to wrap your mind around. But yeah, my community has watched me get married. They've watched me get divorced. They've watched me be in another really toxic relationship. They've watched me deconstruct Christianity. They've watched me come out. They've watched me start to be more of an activist and talk about things that are hard and uncomfortable. And I don't know if a lot of people like that. It's actually really hard to maintain like an income on social media and be an activist. I don't really know if that's like, I'm really noticing that more and more as I speak out against things. Like people don't like to be uncomfortable.
Well, also, we're in a volatile time where a lot is lost in translation on social media. They don't get probably a good impression of your character and heart. It's easy to hate the content of what you're not saying as opposed to being sensitive to the origin of it and where it might be coming from.
Yeah.
So polarized right now.
Well, also like
it is.
It's different than meeting someone in a coffee shop that you have different beliefs and have an exchange with them and then reconsider it over time. Right now, there's this demand for changing your thoughts right now on social media and then a belittling of people if they're not obedient to certain narratives. And so I think if people can get an impression of your heart and mind, I think, you'll be fine. You'll be fine.
I think that's why it's so important to keep sharing because of what you just said. Like tone is lost over text. People are so quick to, cancel culture. I'm like, I don't believe in that. People are actually, people that may hold different beliefs that want to learn are terrified.
Yeah.
They're terrified
to
say the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes
time. That's the other thing. Changing your belief system takes time.
It does. So. And that's why sharing stories are so important because we connect on that human level we all have a story and an experience.
Mm-hmm. I need to connect you with the hashtag I Got Out community.
Okay.
Yes, it's all about sharing your story and getting out of things and
not right now, Sarah. We're in the middle of an interview. We can do it later.
I know. Thanks, babe.
Wait a second.
Wait, so did you and Shauna get married yet? Or I know you had to postpone.
Not yet. So we've changed things up so many times. And I think I say it's probably another struggle of just being a queer couple. Like the wedding planning process wasn't as joyful as we wanted it to be just because of complications with so many people, not agreeing with us and family. And at the end of the day, also very expensive, to be honest. Like just, wow. Like
that's not proprietary to queer couples, just so you know.
Our wedding was also very expensive.
Just a little FYI.
Holy moly. Yeah. The financial cost. And I'm like, great. If that's your priority to spend on that one day, then like go for it. That's awesome. But I think what it came down to is we'd only invited 30 people. And it was still like, oh gosh, probably like 40K from what we'd already just like estimated.
What?
Yeah. And we're like, you know what? Yeah, it's just, I don't know. So we've decided to elope and we're really, really excited about it. We actually like decided at 2 a.m. we were just sitting in bed together and we were like, we'll elope. Like, and we both just got so giddy and happy. And it was the first time I think that we actually made a choice for ourselves. Cause again, at the end of the day, like tell me to my face you planned a wedding without thinking about anyone else. Like guarantee you didn't. I think
Don't
it's
get Nippy
impossible.
started. Nippy, what do you call our wedding?
Which one?
The second, well, you got married twice. That's a different story. But what do you call ours? Well, both of the weddings, what do you call it?
Party.
Whose wedding was it?
Oh, it was your mom's.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm like, I just want to be up on a mountaintop, like just the two of us and maybe like our photographer and just say our vows to each other. I don't even want to worry about an officiant. Like,
Wait,
I'm
wait,
like,
wait,
we can go to the court.
This isn't going to be a Christian wedding?
Oh my gosh. No, we're definitely going to have like, the chapter of love read out loud at our wedding for sure.
I love it. If you want, I'll give you the vows that Keith Raniere wrote for us.
Don't do that.
Just
Don't do
kidding.
that.
Just kidding.
Oh God. It's traumatizing.
It's totally traumatizing. We did renew our vows
Phew.
5 years later,
I
couple
love
summers
that.
ago when I was pregnant with Ace. Yeah, that was really important and needed.
Oh. I mean, yeah.
Mhm.
I can't imagine. Like, yeah.
It was very tainted. But I'm very excited for you eloping. Although I'm sad.
Thank you.
I'm sad that you won't have a party that we could attend. But I know we just met. But
I know. You know what? We've thought about where like maybe we'll do a party or something after, like a get together where we can like celebrate with the people we do want there. But I am excited for the ceremony, like
Yes.
just to be the two of us out in nature with our dogs.
That sounds perfect. And I think that just a little, by the way, I'm going to start another podcast called Unsolicited Advice. So here's my unsolicited
Yes.
advice for you.
So she just stopped giving it to me.
Because I got to take it off.
Like you have an outlet.
I just
outlet.
feel, I'm
I
like,
just need another
please,
place
please
to
start
put
it.
my advice.
And she's going to be giving advice to me on it the
I'm
entire
going to do it
time.
right now for you, Morgan.
Okay.
Is that you might not
I'm
want to do
ready.
this because you might feel like it's selling out or something, but I bet you would have somebody in your like one of your followers or through your influencer world that would sponsor your wedding.
Oh, you're not wrong there. Like we've already had people reach out and
Really?
it's so sweet. Like honestly, it's so sweet. I felt bad because I was going through a follower for our invitation. She did this beautiful, like hand pressed, like embossed. It was just, they were gorgeous. And she was someone, you know what? She shot her shot. I had a lot of respect for people that do that. They'll like send an email and just like promote their business. And I'm like, good for you. Cause like you never know who's going to say yes. And we ended up like using one of my followers originally for like our invitations. And it's so cool. Like I actually love that part of social media, being able
Yeah,
to
it is
connect
cool.
with people,
Yeah.
being able to promote other small businesses.
Yes.
Like what an awesome opportunity.
I love it. It's a real honor when you can do it like consciously. And
Yes.
at the same time, it is scary because like we've mentioned people that we like, and then people are like, "Don't you know that they follow this person, so they're bad?" And we're like,
I know.
It's so hard.
Instagram's a wild, wild west.
It really is. And you've been in it for 10 years. That's impressive. I feel like
It's changed
OG.
a lot.
Is it?
I mean, like, I remember, I'm like, stories are so new. Like, I remember when Instagram was like, you literally just got to post a picture.
Right.
Like, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Just a photo. And then it was like, 15-second videos. And then I remember when they rolled out 60-second videos and only certain influencers had access to those, and then stories came out and it's just evolved so much like from what it used to be. Cause I literally grew my following just off of like, I would do these little grids of yoga pose tutorials. And it was like a 6-cube grid and photos 1 through 6 would be a progression of like how to get into a yoga pose. And that's how I grew my Instagram.
That's wild.
And it's wild to look back on. Yeah. Cause it has changed so much. And it's been cool though. It's been cool to be like a part of the ride.
And also the irony is not lost on me, just the concept of like followers, and how
I know.
how, like,
Hilarious,
it's weird,
right? I
right?
know.
it just feels so weird. How many followers?
I know.
do you
Are
have?
we leading our own cults?
Yes. Amanda Mentel talks about that a lot in her book, Cultish. I'm not sure if you've read it, but I highly recommend
Ooh, I haven't.
that book.
Okay, perfect.
Oh, the other one I was wondering if you'd read. 2 more, actually.
Are we doing the unsolicited advice?
This is more
podcast now?
unsolicited advice. Well, just books I
All
think
right.
that Morgan would like,
Okay.
or wondering if you've read is Educated by Tara Westover.
Yes.
So
Oh
good,
my gosh,
right?
amazing.
She's a dream guest.
Oh, that would be amazing. I was going to say, have you read Sex Cult Nun?
Yes. Yeah,
We
we
interviewed
Love.
interviewed her. Yeah.
You did?
Mhm.
Oh, okay. I may have to listen to that one.
If you liked Sex Cult Nun, we also loved another book about children of God, and it was
Ooh.
called Uncultured by Daniela Mestinek Young. I'll send you these links so you don't forget.
Yes, please.
And that's, do you like to
super
listen?
cool.
Do you like to listen to Audible or you like to read books?
I like to
You
read.
like to read. You mentioned that when I sent mine, right? Did mine come, by the way?
It did. I literally just got it like too with the beanie. It's so,
good.
I'm so sad now that it's summer because I love beanies and I'm like, I can't wait to wear this.
You like to wear it when
People
it
are going
gets
to be
chilly.
like, what is that?
You're like, I'm just a little bit culty. I've been in a few cults.
Yeah, it's fine.
I have followers.
No big deal.
No bigs. He's just like moving on over there.
I mean, I just, you know,
One more book.
you guys
We're
are doing
just
great.
like off on a
You guys are
tangent.
doing
This is
great.
We're starting a book club. Have you read Wayward by Alice Gretchen?
No.
She's ex-evangelical. Alice and Daniela and Faith have all been guests on our podcast. We do have a Goodreads account with all the little bit culty books, but those three are amazing. And Alice is ex-evangelical and has gone through she talks a lot about the purity culture. And now she's just like owning her sexuality and she's a Playboy bunny.
Incredible.
Amazing. Yeah. It's
Good
like-
for her.
Game of Thrones. It's a book.
Yeah.
Too. Yeah.
Yeah. It's Game of Thrones.
Just throwing books
Game of
out.
Thrones.
You just throwing that out?
War and Peace. Leo Tolstoy.
I have read War and Peace.
I got halfway through it in my brain.
The Count of Monte Cristo.
Those are tomes.
Well, I feel like we could just keep doing this for a while, but I want to be mindful of your time and say, well, let me ask you, for those people living under a social rock, where can people find you?
So on Instagram, finding Morgan Tyler. And then my website is just morgantyler.com. So super easy. My name.
And if you want to pass on one nugget of wisdom to our listeners, what do you want people to know the most? If you could like give them an idea to put in their pocket.
Oh man, so many.
You could do a few.
I think the big thing is giving yourself permission to change every day. Because I really just think that is what keeps people stuck for so long, is not giving themselves the grace or the permission to continue changing, continue evolving. Kind of what we were talking about earlier, getting over that it is kind of a hit, to your ego when you feel like you've figured things out and then like admitting, like, hey, actually, I don't think that anymore. But I feel like it just makes you so much stronger as a person and beautiful and well-rounded and open to keep admitting like I'm still learning and I'm still changing, and hopefully we all continue changing our whole life. So I think just giving yourself that grace and that permission to change, and also knowing it doesn't have to be rushed. Like you are on your own timeline and nobody is going to slow you down or speed you up. Like that's your journey. That was something that really helped me over the years, was just like giving myself that grace. And I'd write it down and put it on sticky notes all around the house, on the mirrors, on the doors, on my car. Like it's important to read that and remind that and create those new like neural pathways in your
You're
brain.
absolutely right. You're
I love
absolutely
that.
right.
I'm going to get my sticky notes out.
It's your sticky notes.
I love your process. I wish more people could adopt it. It's been a great interview.
I told you, Nip.
I told
Aw.
you.
I told you.
I told you. Unsolicited
It's been like
advice.
seriously so cool to talk with you all. I mean, like honestly, it really has. So cool to watch your all's journey as well. And
Well, thank you.
just really nice and honored to be here.
For us as well. What a treat. This is the best part of my job. Right now?
Truly.
What?
It's awesome.
Unsolicited advice?
No, just connecting with like
No, I know. I'm
wonderful
kidding.
people. And hopefully one
Yeah.
day we can do yoga in person. I've never been to Kentucky. Well, until then, we'll see you on the gram. And please keep in touch and let us know how we can support you
I
in any
will.
way.
Thank you all. It
Thank
was
you.
awesome to be here.
Mwah.
Mwah.
This podcast is brought to you by Citizens of Sound, a podcast production agency committed to developing and launching shows with gravity and depth. From conception to launch, Citizens will partner with you every step of the way, whether you're an actor, business owner, doctor, fitness coach, hairstylist, or influencer. Connection is the future of communication. Jump on board with Citizens of Sound today and start your show. Go to citizensofsound.com and follow them on Instagram. And trust me, it'll be a really good decision for you. She's great.
Right?
What a great vibe she has, don't you think? Yeah. No, what a great heart and all that. And her process is just one to emulate, I think.
I really do hope we get to meet in person because she just seems really cool. And I do love the way that she's thought about things. And
And you invited yourself to her wedding.
I did invite myself to her wedding. It's a little awkward.
Kinda. And they're eloping. So you'd be like the only one there.
Maybe I could be the photographer.
Yeah. Get yourself in.
And I guess I just did announce the next podcast, Unsolicited Advice with Sarah Edmondson, coming soon.
Is that going to
Wherever
happen?
you get your podcast. I don't know. I got to get this one smooth.
You can outsource that. You got to outsource that advice to someone else. It'd be great.
Well, I know that you said I should do it with like a partner other than you. So I'm holding auditions.
You're breaking up. Okay.
All right, everybody.
Connection's lost.
Go follow Morgan Taylor and tell her what you think of the episode, and stay tuned for perhaps a live chat or something over on Patreon with her as we debrief the fallout, as it were. Hopefully not too much of a fallout. Bye, y'all. Thanks for sticking through to the end. See you next week.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean. I'm hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Hope you liked this episode. Let's keep the conversation going and come hang out with us on Patreon, where we keep the tape rolling each week with special episodes just for Patreon subscribers and where we get deep into the weeds of unpacking every episode of The Vow.
And if you're looking for our show notes or some sweet, sweet swag or official ALBC podcast merch or a list of our most recommended cult recovery resources, visit our website at alittlebitculty.com.
And for more background on what brought us here, check out Sarah's page-turning memoir. It's called Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life. It's available on Amazon, Audible, narrated by my wife, and at most bookstores.
A Little Bit Culty is a Talkhouse podcast and a Trace 120 production. We're executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames, with writing, research, and additional production support by senior producer Jess Tardy. We're edited, mixed, and mastered by our rocking producer Will Rutherford of Citizens of Sound, and our amazing theme song, Cultivated, is by John Bryant and co-written by Nigel Asselin. Thank you for listening.